So this is Section 8 news framing. We've looked at how news editors construct news and in that they pick the stories that meet their news values. Now let's talk about how we frame news. In other words, how we tell a story. And so that'll be our kind of goal for today. How they're framed and what influences can control how stories are framed. And sometimes journalists most definitely can have a bias in this and can frame a story in a certain way. One of the things you'd have to be wary of is commercialism when you're looking at news framing. News organizations want the largest audience possible, right? They want advertising rates to be high. That's where their money is. So if you think, a lot of this kind of curtails into what Chomsky was talking about with political economy, right? If you want advertisers to be engaged, you want them to feel positive towards your show, you're going to ignore any kind of controversial, hard-hitting stories which may be offensive to part of the audience. So you're not going to run stories that may be counter to advertisers' goals. And I can show you a longer video in class dealing with some reporters for a Fox News station, not the cable station, but a local news station that was owned by Fox, and how they had a story basically that painted the company Monsanto in a negative light, and Monsanto threatened to pull all of its advertising from that station. Then you also have marketing perspective. And that's this kind of realization that, in the old days, news departments, especially at television, they didn't have to really make a huge profit. It was expected that the entertainment division of that television station would kind of subsidize the news aspect. You weren't relying on news to make big money. As times have evolved, there is this expectation now that news will draw heavy advertising. Why? Because it's, for the most part, the news is local. So your expectation is that people in the community will be watching that, and that's a good time to show your local advertising. Okay. So what happens is with that kind of mindset is that you want people watching the news because of the advertising. So what do? You try to cater the news to them. So you do marketing surveys, marketing analysis. You look at demographics. You see who's watching at what time. And you think, okay, well, will this story run well, play well with our audience? Will they want to see this story? And you notice how there's teasers throughout the day. Coming up at 6, we'll show you blah, blah, blah. That's all part of marketing. It's trying to draw the audience in. Okay? You're catering that news, which there may not be anything harmful with that, but it can promote sensationalism and promote soft news. So you end up telling a story more so because you think that it'll draw a lot of viewers than to say this is hard news. This is stuff that people need to know. So instead of showing results from a local water analysis in your town, you're showing footage of people signing scholarship deals, scholarship offers, right? It's relatively soft news. The analysis of the local water study, that would be a harder news, in my opinion. Organizational structures matter too. Small companies are more flexible, entrepreneurial, they adapt to changes more quickly, whereas large companies are compartmentalized, walled off, so they respond more slowly to change. So let me give you an explanation of what I mean by that. If you look at local news operations, especially in smaller towns, so we can take news stations in the Golden Triangle, for example. they have less money. They have less resources. They have less people working for the company. What all this means is that you have to figure out how to do things on the cheap. And so when new technologies come along that let you be more efficient, you engage with those and try those out. You know, it was small news operations and organizations that started using video over phone to call in their reports, right? So there'll be, we go live now via FaceTime to someone, or someone logs in on a webcam, and you talk to a guest via their webcam. That's done much more so by the small companies than the large companies. Why? Because the large companies have for years played into this, well, we'll send a reporter out, or we'll do it live via satellite, and the other person has to go to some place that has a satellite link. Let's say the person that's being interviewed, they have to go to a location that can satellite link. The satellite link costs tons of money. There's a whole kind of department that's built around doing satellite links. Those people want to keep their jobs, right? They don't want to lose their jobs to this new technology. So what ends up happening is you have these larger companies that are slower to adopt change. And so you really can see kind of more groundbreaking ways of delivering news via these smaller structures. When talking about organization, you can also talk about ownership, which is that whoever owns the company may have a vested interest in what stories they want to put on. When the power in a news organization is more centralized, in other words, it's dictated more by one person, there's more potential for that person to influence content, right? So critics have complained forever that the reason why Fox News is so conservative is because owner Rupert Murdoch is very conservative, and that he has kind of picked his people that run things, and also he's known for having an ideology that people feel like they need to agree with to be successful in his company. Use of sources people use for their knowledge and expertise on a story may have their own agenda, right? So when you call the same science experts up every time there's a story, what you're going to end up doing is you're not getting more diversity of thought. You're focusing more and more on the thought of this one person, right? So I like to use that because it seems like every time someone has a science question, they ask Bill Nye. If Bill Nye has a bias, then that bias kind of gets represented everywhere. The same for Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astronomer and physicist. People love to use him on the shows. Well, if he has a bias, if he's wrong about something, then that information gets spread out to everyone. If they had different experts on over time, then you would perhaps get some conflicting thoughts, right? Look at CNN's evening panel shows, in which there's news, but it's more about these 4 or 5 people responding to news. And it becomes a shouting match, but it's the same 4 or 5 people, it seems, every night. So it's almost like CNN has become more like The View than it is a real news operating organization, right? It's as if CNN is more concerned with giving you these people's opinions than it is about giving you the news. Another thing we could talk about with use of sources is video news releases, and I'll show you some of these in class. These are corporate prepackaged PR videos sent to news producers in an effort to get the producers to air a story and use the content that was sent. So there's these videos from the Center for Media and Democracy, which I'll show you, but kind of to explain what I'm talking about with these VNRs, these video news releases. You have companies like there's Master Foods, which is a candy company, M&M's, Snickers, all that kind of stuff. Um, every year around Halloween, they will take their PR company that they have, Master Foods PR operation, and the PR operation will make videos that seemingly are informative about safe practices during Halloween, right? If you want to keep your kids safe, here's what you do. Or, here's the latest costumes that are going to be popular this Halloween. They give some information in this video. What they're really doing is they're selling you their product. It's a commercial. It's product placement. They're going to sneak in their candies. They're going to sneak in things that that they want their customers to buy. They'll make that PR video, right, which will be 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, right? And they will take that video and they will ship it free. They will send it free to all the local news operations, with the hope that the local news operation will say, well, look, it's a slow news day. We have a minute to fill in our newscast. Let's take this PR video that was given to us for free and let's just create a story around it. So we'll have our live anchor kind of promote the story and say, tons of people are going out on Wednesday night for trick or treat, and parents want to know how to keep their kids safe. Let's now hear from blah, blah, blah about Halloween safety. And then they run the PR video, right? And so the problem with this is that you're thinking it's local news. You may think that this is news coming from a local expert, but it's not. It really, all it is a pre-constructed advertisement that looks like news, but isn't really news. Branding is very important in news framing. Why? Because reporters can be branded, right? You have a reporter that is known for their hard-hitting stories, or is known for giving a story in a certain way, or because they're branded as being the host. And what I'm trying to get at is that person almost becomes a product more than they do a news source, right? So you could look at the CBS News with Dan Rather, NBC with Tom Brokaw, ABC with Peter Jennings. These are all people that I grew up with, but they ran multiple decades in terms of the shows that they hosted. We see anchors swap around really a lot right now, which is more about this, really, about this news framing aspect of branding. If the ratings start to dip in a show, their first response is not to say, well, maybe people don't like how we're telling the news. They think, well, we need to drop this anchor because people obviously don't like that anchor. So you have these personalities that have become products, right? So why does that matter? Well, if this person is more of a product than a reporter, their own ego is going to get in the way. And they're going to want to bump themselves up and make themselves look more important, right? If they just come to the realization that they're reading off of a teleprompter and they can be replaced in a moment's notice, that threatens them. So they try to build to their own brand. They try to make themselves seem more important. And sometimes that gets in the way of telling a story. Sometimes, like with Brian Williams at NBC, they feel like they have to exert their power so much to keep their position that they'll even make up parts of the story, right? And people will find them out eventually and say, no, that's not really true what you told us, and then they have to go. But it's their own ego that can get them in trouble, right? Everybody wants to be well known and well liked at their job. And sometimes people will do bad things in order to get that. Just general cultural values can influence how you tell a story, right? Journalists try to construct stories that resonate with American values, but this can change over time, right? Because values change. For example, the picture that I'm showing you here with the coffins with the flags draped. For a long time, reporters were banned from viewing this ceremony or whatever, where you bring the dead soldiers home and when you take them off of the plane. The Pentagon did not want reporters shooting that. They felt like it was detrimental to American people to show the dead coming back. Well, that was in the beginning stages of the War on Terror. They wanted those soldiers' sacrifice to be held sacred and not have eyes viewing on it. Now, over time, as the thoughts on the War on Terror shifted and people started questioning, why are we in this war really? Or when do we get out of this war? Or what's our strategy? Do we want to just keep sending young men and women over to be killed? As those values shifted, journalists started demanding more and more, no, this is the story. We need to show these coffins coming home so that people understand the true cost of war. And the Pentagon kind of relented on that. And so reporters were then allowed to show these coffins. So it's just an example of how the values that America holds at any one given time, as those shift, the stories, how you frame those stories can shift too, right? So news directors tend to want to pick things that match values at the time. Hyperlocalism. Hyperlocalism is this kind of response to globalization in news, right? So the theory is that with the internet, now you can get news about anything, right? You can go see what happened today in Brazil, in the Middle East, whatever. You can go look up the news for that day. And so news operations kind of figured that out and said, okay, well, if anybody can get any information from anywhere, maybe what we need to do is not focus on our reach as much and how we make that wider. Maybe the response is to focus more narrow and give you stories that are just about the local place. Okay? So if you look at something like WCBI News, if you look at even the Clarion Ledger, Jackson's newspaper, they're all focusing more intently on the local, what's happened local. What that means is they give you less and less of the bigger national, international picture, right? So, and the internet just helped this as well, because you could find all these local stories on the web and pull them in. For example, on CNN, on their website, you can tell CNN your zip code, and it will look for all stories that are local to that zip code, and it will bring those in, right? This is kind of CNN's response to this, in which they're supposed to be a national/international news source, but even they realize that there needs to be some aspect of them that tells you news that's going on in Starkville, right? But it's just this hyperlocalism is this kind of change in thinking, which is, let's make the news more local, smaller, right? And hopefully that will grab audience members, more audience members. If we don't tell the big national stories, but instead choose the smaller, more local, again, like I said, it's the difference between showing people signing their letters of intent versus exploring who's running for a congressional seat for the state, right? So because of this, sometimes you can lose sight of wider state level news or national news, especially international news. Story formula is just this kind of, it's like branding a personality, branding a host. It's how you brand your story, right? How do you tell stories? How does a journalist tell a story? And you all know that there are certain, and you've watched, and there's certain, especially national level news reporters that like to tell a story in a certain manner, right? So a story formula, that greatly influences how you tell the story. And it kind of goes back to news values, right? People like to have what we call simplified extended conflict. You know, a lengthy political campaign, and talking about Trump versus Hillary. It's almost like it almost is like it's a race, like a physical race. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Who's making up ground? Who's losing ground? Right? Story formula can also be just having that clear narrative plot structure. So as we were talking about with news values, is a clear hero, clear villain, clear ending to the story. Right? So you may choose to pick stories based on that, and you may continue to tell stories in a way that favors that. Maybe you don't look into the intricacies of what is happening, or you don't fully explore who the hero is and what the hero's motivations really were. You don't explore why the villain was doing what they were doing in that story. But the news station wants to tell the story quickly, get in, get out, get to the next story, right? So that can influence how you tell things. And that's really what all these framing things are, is what influences are there that shape how a story is told. Okay? So that's it for Section 8. I'll have several videos to show you in class, but thank you for your attention.